It was a typical Saturday afternoon at the National Stadium, and the crowd was vibrating to the pulsing rhythm of the soccer match. As the stands reverberated with chants and applause, Emily, with her notepad in hand, watched every move on the field attentively. As a journalism student and avid sports fan, she used each game not only for leisure but also as an opportunity to learn and practice her reporting skills. Suddenly, her attention was diverted from the game to a commotion in the stands. A group of aggressive fans, clearly fueled by alcohol and the adrenaline of the moment, surrounded a family composed of a couple and a young boy. Insults flew, heavy and venomous. Mark, a robust man with gentle features, tried to protect his son Tyler, who shrank against his mother, Sarah. Sarah, with tears welling in her eyes, held her son close, trying to cover his ears from the shouting and profanity. Without hesitation, Emily stood up. She walked decisively to the site of the confrontation, her stance firm and her gaze filled with determination. "Hey!" Emily shouted, her voice cutting through the air thick with hostility. The aggressors turned, surprised by the interruption. "Is this really necessary? We're all here to enjoy the game, not to spread hate." One of the fans, a man with a torn shirt and a defiant look, stepped forward, glaring at Emily. "And who are you?" "Defender of the weak," he sneered, drawing laughter from his friends. "I am someone who believes in respect and decency, things you clearly don't know about," Emily retorted, staring at him with an intensity that made the man hesitate. "You should be ashamed. There's a child here." The silence that followed was palpable. The tension in the stands was like a rope about to snap. But then, something remarkable happened. Some people around began to support Emily, their voices rising in a chorus of disapproval against the aggressors. "Yeah, leave the family alone," shouted a woman from the other side of the stands. Equipped with cell phones, several spectators began filming the interaction. The hostile group, now aware of the unwanted attention, muttered some bitter words before dispersing, leaving behind a trail of embarrassment and restrained anger. Mark and Sarah quickly thanked Emily, their words stumbling over tears and gratitude. "You didn't have to do that, but we're so grateful," Mark said, gripping Emily's hand tightly. "I just did what I thought was right," Emily replied, offering a reassuring smile. "I hope this doesn't ruin the rest of the game for you." They nodded, a bit more relieved, and Emily returned to her seat, thinking it would just be another story to tell in her classes. She had no idea that footage of that scene would soon spread across social media, catapulting her into a completely new and unexpected reality. In the days following the game, as Emily prepared for her university classes, she noticed a significant increase in her social media notifications. The video of her intervention at the stadium, where she defended Mark, Sarah, and little Tyler, had gone viral. Shares, supportive comments, and praises flooded her profile, turning her, almost overnight, into a local hero. However, the sudden fame brought unexpected challenges. During a journalism class, Rick, a classmate who had always competed with Emily for opportunities and academic recognition, threw the first punch. "So, Emily, how does it feel to become famous for defending people in exchange for likes?" he said in a tone mixing sarcasm and disdain, loud enough for the entire class to hear. Emily, caught off guard, hesitated for a moment before responding. "Rick, I just did what any decent person would do. It wasn't about being famous." Sure. But we all know how the media works, right? Who wouldn't want to be the hero of the moment?" Rick continued, casting a meaningful look at the other students, many of whom exchanged uneasy glances. As the days went by, Rick's criticisms became more frequent and incisive. He began posting in online forums and social media groups, questioning Emily's true intentions. "Don't be fooled by the heroic facade," he wrote in a particularly venomous post. "It's all about image projection and nothing more." These comments created an atmosphere of doubt and suspicion around Emily, who found herself increasingly isolated in a university environment. Some classmates began to question whether her action at the stadium had been genuine or just a calculated bid for attention. Frustrated and distressed by the growing hostility, Emily sought advice from one of her professors, Mr. Henderson, who had always encouraged her in her studies. In his office, surrounded by piles of books and newspapers, she confided, "I don't know what to do, Mr. Henderson. I just wanted to help, and now this has turned against me." Mr. Henderson, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses and an almost unshakable calm, offered her a reassuring smile. "Emily, the truth has a way of asserting itself, sooner or later. You did what you thought was right, and that's what really matters. These criticisms may be tough now, but they too shall pass." Inspired by his words, Emily decided not to let Rick's actions define her narrative. She began using her social media platform to share more about her motivations and experiences, hoping to dispel the doubts cast over her. As she worked to regain her reputation, an unexpected event promised to change the course of her story. A black limousine abruptly parked in front of the cafe where she was sitting, writing a blog post. The driver got out and walked toward her with an envelope in his hand, bringing with it a new wave of surprises awaiting Emily. As Emily typed the last line of her blog post, the tranquil atmosphere of the local cafe was her favorite refuge, a place where she could lose herself amidst the aromas of fresh coffee and the soft murmur of conversations around her. She pondered how to respond to the recent challenges and doubts cast against her, trying to shape a narrative that reflected her truth. Suddenly, the cafe door swung open, causing a cold draft that made some newspaper pages fly. Emily looked up, curious about the interruption. A tall man dressed in an elegant chauffeur's uniform entered. His gaze scanned the room until his eyes fixed on her. With firm steps and a serious expression, he approached. "Miss Emily?" he asked, in a clear and respectful voice. "Yes, that's me," Emily replied, somewhat surprised. "Can I help you?" "My name is Jameson. I am Mark Sullivan's personal driver. He sent me to deliver this to you." Jameson extended an elegant envelope sealed with golden wax bearing the Sullivan family crest. Emily, still somewhat taken aback by the formality of the moment, accepted the envelope. "Thank you, Jameson. But may I ask what this is?" "It's an invitation. Mississippi Mr. Sullivan would like to thank you personally for your courage and decisive action at the stadium. He hopes you can visit his residence for a dinner in your honor." Curious and a bit cautious, Emily turned the envelope over in her hands. "That's very kind of him. But why me? It was just a gesture." Mr. Sullivan believes that acts of courage, especially those in defense of others, deserve recognition. He would be very honored by your presence. Emily pondered for a moment, considering the unusual situation and the possible implications of accepting such a formal and personal invitation. "I accept. It would be a pleasure to meet Mr. Sullivan and thank him for this gesture." Jameson nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. "Excellent, Miss Emily. Mr. Sullivan will be delighted. I will be at your disposal to pick you up at a day and time convenient for you." "Let's schedule it for this Friday evening then," Emily replied, deciding to dive into the experience, regardless of where it might lead her. "Perfect. I will pick you up at 7 o'clock. If you need anything until then, please don't hesitate to contact me," Jameson said, handing her a card with his contact information. As Jameson left, Emily felt a mix of anxiety and excitement. She knew this dinner might be just a formality, or it could open doors she had never imagined. With the invitation in hand, she finished her drink, her thoughts already focused on the meeting that could very well change the course of her life. As she prepared to leave the cafe, a shadowy figure watched from afar, marking the beginning of new challenges that Emily would still have to face. On Friday night, exactly at 7 o'clock, Mark Sullivan's elegant black car pulled up in front of Emily's modest apartment. Jameson stepped out with the same respectful and courteous demeanor, opening the car door for her. Emily, dressed with understated elegance, felt butterflies in her stomach as she stepped into the car. The city streets flashed by the window as they drove to Mark's imposing residence. Upon arrival, Mark's mansion was even more impressive up close. Bathed in soft lights, The facade exuded a sense of grandeur and history. Jameson led Emily to the main entrance, where she was greeted by a butler who guided her into the reception hall. Mark Sullivan awaited her, with a demeanor that blended authority and kindness. Beside him stood Sarah and little Tyler, now visibly happier and more secure in the family setting. Mark stepped forward with a warm smile, extending his hand. "Emily, it's a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your courage at the stadium was remarkable. We are deeply grateful." "Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I'm glad to see Tyler is doing well," Emily replied, shaking his hand. "Please, call me Mark. Let's have dinner. I hope you like seafood," he said, guiding her into a sumptuously decorated dining room. The table was set with understated elegance, and each place had a name card for the guests. The dinner began with a light appetizer followed by delicately prepared dishes. Throughout the meal, conversation flowed naturally. Mark and Sarah shared a bit about their lives, and Emily talked about her studies and her passion for journalism. "Emily, I want you to know that if you need anything, my family and I are here for you," Mark said, his tone sincere and firm. "What you did for us wasn't a small feat, it's a testament to your character, and we want to support you in your endeavors, whether in your education or your future career." Emily felt deeply touched by the genuineness of the offer. "This means a lot to me, Mark. I'm truly grateful for your generosity." "It's the least we can do," Sarah replied, holding Emily's hand. "You showed great courage, something Tyler will never forget. You are a role model for him, and for us too." As dessert was served, an atmosphere of friendship and mutual respect had formed between them. Emily felt not only grateful but empowered by the support network that was extending before her. At the end of the dinner, Mark walked Emily to the door. "I hope we can see each other again, not just in formal circumstances. You are always welcome here." "Thank you, Mark. Tonight was wonderful. I appreciate all of this more than I can express." With a final wave, Emily got into the car, heading back home under the starlight. As the car pulled away, she reflected on the possibilities that this new connection could bring. However, what she didn't know was that Rick was intensifying his efforts to discredit her, spreading rumors and doubts that would soon demand her attention and resilience. As Emily retreated to the warm thoughts and promises of support from the previous night, a very different plot was unfolding in the university corridors. Rick, driven by a mix of envy and spite, was determined to discredit Emily at all costs. His resentment had significantly worsened since the stadium incident and the subsequent Thanksgiving dinner Emily received from the influential Sullivan family. That morning, under the gray autumn sky, Rick met with two of his closest friends in the campus cafe, both equally cynical. With a conspiratorial look, he slid his tablet in front of them, showing a series of posts and comments he had prepared to disseminate online. "Look at this," Rick said, an astute gleam in his eyes. "Everyone's buying into this hero story, but I know there's more. Emily isn't who she seems to be." His friends, spurred on by Rick's insinuating tone, leaned in to view the posts. One of them, featuring a photo of Emily and her boyfriend, John, had a particularly venomous caption. "Is our dear hero really in love, or is it just another play for more attention?" "That's low, even for you, Rick," one of the friends commented, though with a smile that denoted more admiration than reproach. "Sometimes, you need to play dirty to reveal the truth," Rick replied, satisfied with the impact of his words. "And there's more. I'm starting to question how someone as ordinary as Emily ended up at a dinner with Mark Sullivan. Something doesn't add up." With this narrative in mind, Rick spent the day spreading his venomous rumors. Between classes, he whispered to classmates about Emily's supposed true intentions, insinuating that she was using her sudden fame for personal gain, including her relationship with John. In the afternoon, during a group discussion in the library, Rick took his insinuations to a new level. When the topic of ethics in journalism came up, he didn't miss the chance to drop a hint. "It's interesting how some people can manipulate the media to create a favorable public image. Ethics seem flexible when fame is at stake," he said, casting a significant glance in Emily's direction, who, by coincidence, was sitting a few tables away. Emily, who had until then kept her focus on her studies, felt a pang of discomfort. She looked up, meeting Rick's gaze. For a moment, their eyes locked, and she realized the malice behind his facade of the ideal student. Aware of the growing wave of rumors, Emily knew she needed to act. Rick's words were like thorns threatening her integrity and the peace she had begun to build. At that moment, determined not to let the shadows of doubt eclipse her truth, Emily decided it was time to confront Rick and clear her name, preparing for the confrontation that would inevitably come. In the days that followed, the university campus became a silent battleground of rumors and suspicion. Emily, however, was not willing to let Rick's lies define her narrative. With firm determination, she began gathering evidence and seeking support to expose the false accusations against her. One of her closest friends, Lucas, an information technology student, offered his help. "Emily, I can try to recover the messages and posts Rick deleted. If he's spreading rumors online, there must be a digital trail," Lucas explained while setting up specialized software on his laptop. "That would be amazing, Lucas. I really need to prove that everything he's saying is false," Emily responded, feeling a glimmer of hope. For several nights, Lucas worked diligently, scouring servers and caches. Finally, his skills paid off. He managed to recover several messages and emails Rick had sent, in which he clearly incited other students to turn against Emily. Moreover, he found audio recordings of Rick talking with his peers about how he planned to ruin Emily to put himself at the top of the journalism class. With the evidence in hand, Emily arranged a meeting with the university's disciplinary board. In the room, with walls adorned with diplomas and awards, the air was thick with tension. Emily, accompanied by Lucas and another friend, presented the recordings and emails, detailing each incident of defamation and its consequences on her academic and personal life. Rick, summoned to the same meeting, initially tried to deny the accusations. However, confronted with undeniable evidence, his face paled and his facade of confidence crumbled. "This is all a misunderstanding," he stammered, looking at the board members, who watched him with expressions of disapproval and disappointment. "A misunderstanding? Rick, you deliberately tried to sabotage my reputation." "This isn't a misunderstanding, it's pure malice," Emily retorted, her firm and clear voice reverberating in the room. After a tense deliberation, the board decided that Rick would be suspended for a semester and required to attend an ethics and integrity program. Grateful, Emily felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. She had defended her integrity and demonstrated the truth about her character. As she left the boardroom, a smile of relief crossed her face. The shadows of the lies had been dispelled, but the victory was bittersweet. She knew that the fight against prejudice and injustice was far from over. That night, reflecting on recent events, Emily realized that her journey was just beginning. The experiences had strengthened her resolve, and she felt ready to face new challenges, knowing that the battle for justice and equality would require not only courage but also an indomitable will to fight for what is right. As the seasons changed, so did Emily's life continue to evolve. The incident with Rick had become a closed chapter in her life, but the lessons learned reverberated in every decision she made. Now, with John by her side, she faced a world often hostile to the love they shared. John, a talented software engineer and a man of gentle character, had become not only her partner but also her greatest supporter in the ongoing struggles against prejudice. On a Saturday afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the city park, Emily and John felt the piercing gazes of disapproval. It was a constant reminder that, despite social advances, there were still barriers to be broken. "You feel it, don't you?" John asked, squeezing Emily's hand as a group of passers-by cast sideways glances. "Yes, I feel it," Emily replied, sighing deeply. "But I won't let it affect us, John. We know who we are, and what we feel for each other is all that matters." On another occasion, during dinner at a local restaurant, a couple at the next table murmured nasty comments loud enough to be heard. "It's sad to see how some people can betray their own culture," the woman said, casting a venomous glance toward Emily and John. Emily felt a wave of anger, but before she could respond, John held her hand across the table, offering a calming smile. "Let it go, Emily. Our happiness doesn't depend on their approval." Despite John's support, each incident left a mark, and Emily often found herself reflecting on how she could use her voice and her pen to fight against such injustices. It was then that she decided to start a blog dedicated to discussing issues of prejudice, love, and equality. The blog quickly gained followers, becoming a space for dialogue and mutual support. In one of her most popular posts, Emily wrote, "Love knows no boundaries, sees no colors or creeds. Love is the true resistance against prejudice." The response was overwhelmingly positive, with many sharing their own stories and thanking Emily for her courage. Despite these moments of victory, challenges persisted. One day, as they were preparing to attend a concert, Emily received a series of anonymous messages on her blog, each more threatening than the last. Shocked but undeterred, Emily knew it was a sign that there was still much work to be done. These incidents, though painful, only strengthened Emily's resolve. With John by her side, she became stronger, more determined to defend not just their love but the right of everyone to live free of prejudice and hate. As they faced these adversities, Emily and John's journey was far from over, and new challenges were already on the horizon. Together, they prepared for the future, knowing that no matter what came their way, they would face it all side by side. As the years went by, Emily and John intertwined their lives not just with words of love, but with actions that challenged the adversities that continuously tested their union. The prejudice they faced did not diminish, but the strength of their relationship intensified, turning each obstacle into a stepping stone toward a deeper commitment. One autumn night, under a sparkling canopy of stars, John decided it was time to take a decisive step. They were walking home after a night at the theater, a passion they enthusiastically shared. Emily, wrapped in a scarf to protect herself from the cold breeze, laughed at a joke John had just told. Stopping in front of an ancient oak tree that had witnessed many of the couple's early meetings, John turned to Emily with an intense look. "Emily, remember the first time we passed by here? I was so nervous I tripped over that root there," he said, pointing to the ground with a smile. Emily laughed, recalling the moment. "Yes, I thought you were doing a strange dance to impress me." John smiled, then his gaze became serious. "Emily, since then, every day by your side has been a revelation, about courage, about love, about fighting injustices. You've made me a better person, and I want to continue this journey with you, forever." Kneeling, he pulled a small box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a ring. "Emily, will you marry me?" Tears glistened in Emily's eyes as she nodded vigorously. "Yes, John. Yes, I will." The news of their engagement was met with joy and some reservations from friends and family. Despite this, they planned their wedding with enthusiasm, opting for a simple yet elegant ceremony in the park where they had often met. They wanted the day to reflect their personalities: open, welcoming, and full of hope. The wedding day arrived bathed in soft autumn light. Emily walked down the aisle of fallen leaves, her dress flowing gracefully, her hand firmly on her father's arm. Seeing John waiting for her under the arch of wildflowers, her heart overflowed with love and certainty. The words they exchanged during the ceremony were more than vows. They were promises of mutual support, respect, and courage in the face of adversity. "In joy and sorrow, in sickness and in health, I promise to stand by your side, sharing every dream and every challenge," John declared, looking into Emily's eyes. "I promise to love you, respect our differences, fight against the injustices we face together, and above all, never forget how much better we are together," Emily replied, her voice full of emotion. After the ceremony, as the guests celebrated, the couple shared a moment of tranquility, reflecting on the journey they had traveled together. It was a new beginning, a renewed commitment to face whatever the world had in store for them. But as they celebrated, they did not know that new challenges were already on the way, ready to test the strength of their newly affirmed commitment. Emily and John, now united as husband and wife, would soon discover that the love they shared would be the key to facing the storms ahead. Emily and John's lives were about to gain a new chapter, marked by the arrival of a little one who symbolized the union and love they shared. Emily, now pregnant, radiated a mix of joy and anxiety as the due date approached. John, in turn, devoted himself wholeheartedly to ensuring everything was ready to welcome their first child. On a cold winter morning, the contractions began. Emily, supported by John, who held her hand firmly and lovingly, was rushed to the hospital. The journey there was filled with anticipation and concern as both prepared for the joys and challenges they knew would come. At the hospital, as Emily was settled in, the excitement of the moment was briefly overshadowed by curious glances and whispers among some staff and visitors. Past experiences of prejudice had not been forgotten, and the couple knew their child's arrival might be marked by more than just celebrations. John, always the defender of his family, sensed the tension in the air. "Don't worry about them, Emily," he whispered, kissing her forehead tenderly. "Today is about us, about our family, about our child's arrival." Emily nodded, drawing strength from John's reassuring words. She focused on breathing, concentrating on her child's arrival more than on the shadows of judgment trying to invade that intimate and precious moment. After hours of labor, under the careful guidance and support of the medical team, who were professional and compassionate, Emily and John received a healthy baby boy into their arms. His vigorous cry filled the room, bringing tears of joy to the couple's eyes. "Hello, little one," Emily murmured, her face illuminated by a mixture of tears and smiles as she held her son for the first time. "Welcome to the world, my love." John, looking at his son and then at Emily, felt immense pride. "We did it, darling. He's perfect." As they settled into the maternity room, the couple shared moments of tenderness and happiness, creating a bubble of love around their new family member. However, outside the safety of this bubble, the reality of the challenges they would face as a multicultural family began to loom. Hushed conversations and lingering glances were directed at them as nurses and other parents passed by in the hallway. Emily noticed but chose to focus on the joy of her new role as a mother. In the following days, as they adjusted to the new routine with the baby, the couple found strength in each other and in the certainty that, together, they could face any adversity. But as they prepared to take their son home, they could not foresee the challenges awaiting them outside the sanctuary of the hospital. Parenthood was just beginning, bringing with it a new series of trials that would test their resilience and love. As Emily and John's son, whom they named Michael, approached his 8th birthday, it became clear that he was not growing up in a world that accepted him unconditionally. Despite the love and positive environment his parents strove to provide, Michael began encountering the harsh realities of prejudice that his parents knew all too well. Michael, with his unruly curls and contagious smile, was frequently the subject of curious looks and indiscreet questions about his mixed heritage, especially at school, where differences are observed most acutely by children. On a sunny autumn afternoon, when Emily went to pick him up from school, she noticed that Michael looked particularly downcast. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" Emily asked as she held his hand, feeling the hesitation in his small fingers. "Some boys at school said I shouldn't be on the same soccer team as them," Michael murmured, avoiding his mother's gaze. "They said I'm different." Emily felt a pang in her heart, memories of her own struggles surfacing. She crouched down to his eye level, her expression firm but full of love. "Michael, you are perfect just the way you are. People sometimes fear or don't understand what's different, but that doesn't make what they say right." "But it hurts, Mom," Michael confessed, his brown eyes shining with the first tears. "I know, my love, I know it hurts," Emily said, hugging him. "But always remember, you are strong and loved, and we will always be here for you." John, who had joined them, added in a soft voice, "And we will always support you, no matter what. We'll face this together, as a family." Strengthened by his parents' support, Michael wiped away his tears and nodded. The following days were a mix of challenges and small victories. Emily and John held discussions with Michael's teachers, who committed to paying more attention and fostering an inclusive environment. The school initiated awareness programs, inviting experts to speak about diversity and inclusion, which helped create a more welcoming environment for all students. Although Michael still faced moments of isolation, he began to find friends who accepted and valued him for who he was. The determination and love of Emily and John not only helped Michael navigate the challenges of prejudice, but also inspired other parents to advocate for their children and strive for a more inclusive community. As time went on and Michael grew, learning to face adversity with his head held high, the family prepared for the future, knowing that new challenges might arise. But they also knew that together, they could overcome any obstacle. As Michael developed in his environment, the next chapter of their lives promised new stories of resilience and love. As Michael grew, the family faced ups and downs, with unexpected challenges testing the strength of their bond. During one of these challenging moments, Michael's health took a worrying turn. One day, while playing in the park, he suffered a severe fall, resulting in an injury that required immediate medical attention. John and Emily, panicked, rushed Michael to the nearest hospital. However, upon arrival, they were confronted with more than just a medical emergency. They also faced the harsh reality of an overburdened healthcare system and the coldness of bureaucracies that lacked empathy for their critical moment. In the hospital waiting room, John tried to calm a visibly distressed Michael, while Emily argued with the staff about treatment options. "Please, he needs care now. We can't wait any longer," Emily pleaded, the urgency clear in her voice. "Ma'am, I understand your concern, but there are other patients before you. We need to follow protocol," the receptionist replied, uninterested. The family's financial situation, already strained, complicated matters further. Emily and John had invested their savings in a struggling business, and the unforeseen medical costs threatened their already fragile financial balance. Returning to her husband and son, Emily felt a mix of frustration and despair. "John, what are we going to do? We can't just sit here and wait," she said, trying to keep her voice steady so as not to scare Michael further. John, holding Michael's hand, responded with forced calm, "We'll find a way, Emily. Maybe we can ask for help. We can call our friends, our family. Someone should be able to help us." But when John and Emily began contacting those close to them, the response was disheartening. Many expressed sympathy, but few were willing or able to offer the concrete help Michael needed. Some even hesitated, uncomfortable with the idea of getting involved in such a complicated situation, their actions or lack thereof revealing a subtle but painful prejudice against the family. However, among the discouraging responses, one call brought unexpected hope. An old family friend who had heard about the situation through social media reached out to Emily. "Emily, I saw your post about Michael. My brother-in-law works at a different hospital, and he says he can help. I'll put him in touch with you right now." Relieved and grateful, Emily and John quickly arranged for Michael to be transferred to the other hospital, where he was promptly treated. The help came at a crucial moment, and the gratitude they felt for this friend and her brother-in-law was immense. With Michael finally receiving the necessary care, Emily and John reflected on the frightening journey of the day. While it was a reminder of the difficulties they faced, it also reinforced the importance of their community and human connections, which were sometimes the only anchor in times of crisis. As Michael recovered, life continued to bring its challenges, but also its lessons of resilience and the constant need to fight against prejudice to ensure a better future for their son. They knew that no matter how difficult the journey was, they were not alone. And this awareness gave them the strength to face the challenges ahead. After Michael's recovery, Emily and John decided to take the little one for a walk in the local park, a place that always brought them peace and good memories. While Michael ran ahead, laughing among the fallen autumn leaves, Emily and John walked a little behind, exchanging relieved smiles after the emotional storm of the past few weeks. As they approached the lake, a place frequently visited by families and couples, Emily spotted a familiar figure in the distance. It was Mark Sullivan, the man whose kindness in the past had been a beacon of hope for them. He was with his wife Sarah and their son Tyler, now a teenager. The reunion was a pleasant surprise, as if fate had chosen that moment to cross their paths once again. "Mark, Sarah," Emily called, waving as they approached. Mark turned at the sound of his name, a broad smile spreading across his face as he recognized Emily and John. "Emily, John, what a wonderful surprise! How are you?" he said, opening his arms to greet them. "We're well now," John replied with a shy smile, as Michael ran to join them, curious about his parents' acquaintances. The conversation flowed naturally, and soon Emily shared the recent challenges they faced with Michael's health. Mark's expression shifted to one of immediate concern. "I'm so sorry to hear that. How is he now?" "Better, thankfully," Emily replied, looking fondly at Michael, who was distracted, throwing stones into the lake with Tyler. "But it was tough, especially with the medical expenses." Without hesitation, Mark assumed a serious tone, a reflection of his ongoing generosity. "Emily, John, please let me help. I would like to take care of Michael's medical expenses." "It's the least I can do," John began to protest. "Mark, that's extremely generous, but we can't accept." Mark gently interrupted. "John, I insist. Not as charity, but as a gesture of friendship. You did so much for me and my family in the past. Allow me to give back in some way." Emily, moved by the unexpected offer and Mark's kindness, felt a mix of gratitude and relief. "Thank you, Mark. Truly, this means so much to us." With the details settled, and Mark's promise to handle the expenses, the park outing transformed from a simple afternoon of leisure into a moment of deep gratitude and renewed friendships. Michael and Tyler, oblivious to the adults' concerns, enjoyed their own adventure around the lake. As the day came to an end, and the afternoon shadows lengthened over the park, Emily and John reflected on the incredible turn of events. Mark's generosity not only alleviated a significant financial burden, but also reinforced their belief in the power of human connections and friendship. As they prepared to head home, with promises to meet again soon, Emily and John knew that despite the challenges, they had valuable allies. And as the sun set, casting a golden glow over the park, they felt ready to face whatever the future might bring. Michael's journey still had many chapters ahead, each promising new stories of resilience and love. After the meeting at the park and Mark's generous offer, Emily felt a deep gratitude that transcended the years since her first act of courage. Emily and John organized a dinner at their home as a way to express their thanks. They wanted Mark and his family to know how much his gesture meant to them. On the night of the dinner, Emily and John's house was filled with laughter and the aroma of home-cooked food. Emily had prepared Mark's favorite dishes, remembering an old conversation about his culinary preferences. When Mark, Sarah, and Tyler arrived, they were greeted with warm hugs. "Mark, I don't even know how to begin to thank you for what you did for our family," Emily began as they sat down at the elegantly set dinner table. "You turned a very stressful situation into a moment of relief and hope for us." Mark, with a humble smile, replied, "Emily, I never forgot the day you stood up for my family. Your courage at that stadium wasn't a small thing. It was an act of genuine kindness that we have always valued. Being able to help now is just my way of saying I'm still grateful." Sarah added, "And we always tell Tyler about you as an example of how one action can make a lasting difference. You inspired him too." Tyler, now a teenager, nodded. "It's true, Emily. My mom and dad always told me about what you did. It made me want to be someone who stands up for what's right too." The dinner continued with an exchange of stories and memories, reinforcing bonds and sharing laughter. Later, John raised a toast to Mark and his family for showing us the true meaning of friendship and support, and to Emily, whose courage continues to inspire all of us. Glasses clinked in a sound of agreement and celebration. The evening was a powerful reminder that even in the most challenging moments, human kindness can flourish and impact lives far beyond that initial moment of action. As the night unfolded, Emily reflected on the support network they had. She knew that challenges might continue, but with friends like Mark and his family and John's unwavering love, they were better equipped to face whatever came. As they said their goodbyes, Mark reiterated his support. "Remember, We're just a call away for anything you need." With hearts full of gratitude, Emily and John waved as Mark's family departed. In the comforting silence of their home, with Michael already asleep, they knew that the lessons of kindness and gratitude taught and learned would be passed on, shaping not only Michael's character but also the community around them. And so, as the night fell, they prepared for the future, knowing that every small act of kindness was a thread that wove the rich tapestry of their lives. The days following the Thanksgiving dinner for Mark were filled with renewed hope and happiness for Emily, John, and little Michael. Michael's recovery after the park incident was swift, largely thanks to the medical support Mark had facilitated, allowing for top-notch treatment and care. On a sunny afternoon, as Michael played in the backyard with the energy only a recovered child possesses, Emily and John watched from the porch, their hearts relieved and full of gratitude. "Look at him, John," Emily said with a smile. "It's like he never went through all that." John, with his arm around Emily, replied, "He's a warrior, just like his mother." He gave her a gentle kiss on the forehead. "And we're so lucky to have friends like Mark." "Yes, true friends reveal themselves in the toughest times," Emily agreed, recalling Mark's generosity and unconditional support. As Michael ran across the lawn, chasing butterflies and laughing, Emily called him inside. "Michael, come here, sweetheart. I have a surprise for you," she announced, holding a small package. Curious, Michael ran over to his parents, his eyes shining with the anticipation of a child who loves surprises. Emily handed him the package, which he opened with nimble fingers. Inside was a new adventure book about courage and friendship, themes that had become significant to him. "Wow! Thank you, Mom. Thank you, Dad," Michael exclaimed, flipping through the book with enthusiasm. "It's a story about a little hero, much like you," John said, laughing as he saw his son's excitement. "We hope it inspires you as much as you inspire us every day." As the day turned into night, the family gathered in the living room, with Michael reading a few pages of his new book out loud. The story spoke of overcoming challenges and the importance of staying true to one's values, a lesson Michael was learning early in life. This period of recovery and happiness further solidified the family's unity. Emily and John felt more confident and prepared for future challenges, knowing they could count on the support of loyal friends and a community beginning to understand and value diversity and inclusion. Thus, as they prepared for the next phase of life, Emily and John knew that resilience and kindness would continue to be the pillars of their family. Happiness had not only returned to their home but now had deeper roots, strengthened by the trials and triumphs they had shared. And as Michael closed his book with a satisfied smile, Emily and John exchanged a look of understanding, ready to face any new adventure life might bring their way. As the years unfolded, Emily and John witnessed the growth not only of Michael but also of their own understanding and resilience as a family. Every obstacle faced, every moment of prejudice overcome, had reinforced the fabric of values they cultivated at home. Mutual respect, courage in the face of adversity, and an unwavering belief in justice. On a Sunday afternoon, as the family gathered in the garden for a picnic, Emily watched John and Michael playing soccer, a scene of pure, carefree joy. Watching them, she reflected on the battles they had fought and won together. John approached, noticing her contemplative expression. "Lost in thought?" he asked, sitting beside her on the blanket spread out on the grass. "I was just thinking about everything we've been through, about how each challenge taught us something valuable," Emily shared, her gaze following Michael as he ran with the family dog. John nodded, taking her hand. "Yes, each difficulty seemed to strengthen our commitment to what we believe in. And looking at Michael, I feel we are passing the right lessons to him." "Exactly. He's growing up in a world that's still not perfect, but we're teaching him not just to face injustice but also to promote change," Emily said, proud. Michael ran over to them, the soccer ball in one hand and the dog trotting beside him. "Mom, Dad, did you see my goal?" he asked with a radiant smile. "We did, champ. You're getting better every day," John replied, ruffling his hair. "You know what? I think these little victories of his and ours are what really matter," Emily reflected aloud. It's about how we handle life daily, and how we teach him to be strong and kind. That's right, John agreed. And speaking of which, I've been thinking, maybe we should do something more with the lessons we've learned. Maybe a workshop or a talk in the community about diversity and inclusion. Emily smiled, inspired by the idea. I'd love that. Let's plan something that can really make a difference. Let's turn our experiences into something positive for others. With this new project in mind, Emily and John felt energized by a new direction in their lives. They would not only navigate their own difficulties but also help others understand and overcome theirs. As the sun set and they packed up the picnic, they felt a renewal of purpose, knowing that every small effort to make the world better counted. The life lessons they had learned over the years prepared them not only to teach Michael how to be a better person, but also to positively influence their community. And as they planned their next steps, they knew that every action, every word, and every teaching strengthened not only themselves but everyone around them. The leaves on the trees began to turn golden and red, signaling the arrival of a fresh and promising autumn. Emily and John, strengthened by the challenges they had overcome and Michael's restored health, felt more hopeful and determined than ever to make a difference in their community. As they planned the workshop on diversity and inclusion, both knew they were paving the way for a future full of possibilities. On a quiet afternoon in their living room, Emily and John spread papers and notes across the coffee table, organizing topics and activities for the workshop. Michael played on the floor beside them, building castles with his blocks. John, what do you think about including a Q&A session? We could share a bit of our journey, answer people's questions, and maybe help clear up some misunderstandings, suggested Emily as she reviewed her notes. I think it's a great idea, Emily. It could make everything more personal and impactful. We can really show how diversity enriches our lives, John agreed, marking the suggestion in their plan. As they discussed, Michael approached, holding one of his blocks. Mom, Dad, can I help with the workshop too? He asked with a curious look. Emily exchanged a smiling glance with John before responding. Of course, sweetheart. You are a very important part of our story. How about helping to show other kids how great it is to have friends of all kinds? She suggested. Michael nodded enthusiastically. I can show my friends at school and how we play together. Perfect, Michael, John said, giving him a high five. You'll be our junior ambassador for inclusion. With plans taking shape, Emily and John felt a renewal of their purpose. They were not only facing their own struggles but were ready to lead by example, offering others the tools to build a more welcoming and fair community. As the workshop date approached, excitement grew at home. Posters were created, invitations sent, and the community began to show interest. Community leaders, teachers, and other families expressed their support and desire to participate. On the day of the event, as they prepared the community hall to welcome participants, Emily looked at John and Michael, who were arranging chairs together. John, we're doing something good here, she said, a mix of pride and hope in her voice. Yes, we are, John replied, pulling her into a hug. And we'll keep doing it, for Michael, for us, and for everyone who needs a little more understanding and acceptance in their lives. With the workshop ready to begin, Emily and John looked to the future, knowing that regardless of the challenges they might still face, they had each other and a community that was learning to embrace diversity. It was a promising future, full of potential for positive and lasting change, guided by education and love. As the afternoon light gave way to dusk, Emily reflected on the transformations not only within her own home but also extending beyond, touching the lives of her extended family. In the months since the Diversity and Inclusion Workshop, Emily had noticed subtle yet significant changes in her relatives' attitudes. There was a growing understanding and a willingness to confront old prejudices that were once unquestioned but were now openly discussed and challenged. At a family gathering, as everyone gathered around a backyard bonfire at Emily's house, the conversation naturally drifted to the themes covered in the workshop. Emily, holding a cup of hot tea, listened as her uncle, who had always been somewhat reluctant to accept her ideas, shared a recent experience. You know, Emily, I've been thinking a lot about what you said that day. About how our words and actions, even if unintentional, can really affect those around us, he began, looking into the softly crackling flames. I've started to notice things at work, comments I used to ignore, and, well, I've decided I don't want to be part of that problem. Emily smiled, her heart warmed by her uncle's words. It means a lot to hear you say that. Change isn't easy, but it's so important. You've opened our eyes, Emily, said her aunt, who was sitting beside her husband. We're really proud of the work you're doing and the example you're setting for Michael. Yes, her father chimed in, who had been one of the most resistant initially. I was wrong in many of my old ways of thinking. Seeing you stand up for what's right, it's made me rethink a lot. As the conversation flowed, Emily realized the impact her actions were having. She and John had started a wave of change that now reverberated through their family connections, fostering an environment where issues of justice and equality were not only accepted but embraced. It was late when the family gathering began to disperse, with warm hugs and promises to continue the conversation. Emily and John helped clean up the backyard, their hearts filled with hope. You see, love, John said as he put away the last chairs. Your courage and willingness to speak out are making a difference, not just here but everywhere we touch. I know, Emily replied, her gaze lost in the stars above. And to think it all started with one small action. It really shows the power of living according to our values. With Emily's family embracing a new perspective, the legacy of love and change was being solidly built. The small seeds of understanding and acceptance that Emily had planted were blossoming into a garden of positive change, strengthening all of them to face any future challenges. And as night fell over their home, they knew they were ready to carry this legacy forward, wherever life might take them. As the seasons changed, Emily's influence on her community and family solidified, transforming into a lasting force of inspiration and change. Her actions, starting with the courageous defense of a family at the stadium years ago, now reverberated throughout her network, inspiring a new generation to embrace compassion and justice. On a cool spring afternoon, Emily was invited to speak at a social justice conference, an event that gathered activists, educators, and community leaders from various parts of the country. As she prepared for her speech, she reflected on the journey that had brought her there. Are you ready, Mom? Michael asked, holding her hand firmly as they walked together through the conference center corridors. I think I am, Emily replied, smiling at him. You know, every time I talk about our story, I'm reminded of how every little moment counts. Entering the auditorium, Emily was greeted with warm applause. She walked to the podium, her heart beating with a mix of nervousness and determination. Looking out at the crowd, she began her speech. Good afternoon, everyone, she said, her voice clear and confident, filling the space. Today, I'm here to talk about something we can all understand: courage. Not just the courage to face big challenges, but the courage to do what's right, even when it seems small or insignificant. She continued, sharing details of her life, the intervention at the stadium, the struggles against prejudice, and how these experiences shaped her family and her approach to life. Each of us has the power to impact the world around us. Sometimes, all it takes is a moment of courage, a decision to stand up for someone, or to speak out when it would be easier to remain silent. At the end of her presentation, Emily invited questions, responding with the sincerity and passion that were her trademarks. A young man in the audience raised his hand, his expression serious. How do you keep hope alive, even when things are tough? He asked. Emily paused, thoughtful, before answering. Hope is like a plant that needs to be watered, she explained. You nurture it with positive actions, with community, with love. And remember, even on the darkest days, that change is possible. What we do matters and can echo for generations. After the event, many came to thank her, sharing their own stories of struggle and resilience. Emily listened to each one, reinforced in her belief that her journey, while unique, was interconnected with many others. As she left the conference hand in hand with Michael, Emily felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She knew that her family story was just one chapter in a much larger book of social change. And as the sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, she was ready for whatever came next, armed with the certainty that even a single act of courage could transform the world, one life at a time.
So, if you're not subscribed yet, click on the subscribe button below and join our community. Thank you for your support and see you in the next videos.
Hola, suscríbete a Historias Vitales para no perderte nuevas historias. Mi esposa había estado trabajando en su proyecto especial durante 4 meses ahora. No era su proyecto personal, pero ella era la persona principal y responsable de su éxito. El proyecto estaba diseñado para salvar a su empresa, Bixler Enterprises. Los últimos 4 meses habían sido difíciles porque se vio obligada a trabajar duro. Era importante tanto para ella como para la empresa. Había una buena posibilidad de que Bixler Enterprises quebrara si el proyecto no se completaba. Sara tenía una licenciatura de Albrecht y un MBA de Wharton. Era la más inteligente de la familia. Yo empecé a trabajar como mecánico de autos justo después de la secundaria y después de 21 años seguía siendo mecánico de autos. No me importaba porque me gustaba el trabajo y pagaba bien. Era suficiente para pagar la universidad de Sara y criar a 2 hijos. No vivíamos lujosamente, pero estábamos bien. Los niños ya se habían mudado, y las cosas iban bastante bien con nuestros ingresos. Sara quedó embarazada 3 meses después de casarnos a la edad de 18 años. Durante los primeros años de nuestro matrimonio, vivimos con mis padres. Ellos tenían una gran casa vacía ya que 4 de mis hermanos se habían mudado. Eso significaba que teníamos una niñera mientras Sara completaba sus primeros años de universidad. Debido a 2 embarazos, la carrera de 4 años le llevó 6 años completarla. Fue difícil, pero lo logró. Siempre tuve trabajo y nunca me faltó trabajo extra si lo necesitaba. Después de que Sara se graduó de Wharton, alquilamos nuestro propio lugar. Tuvo ofertas de trabajo de varias empresas grandes, pero todas requerían que nos mudáramos. A mí no me importaba, pero Sara quería quedarse cerca de casa. Por eso decidió trabajar en Bixler Enterprises. Pagaba bien, pero lo más importante, le daba responsabilidad y la oportunidad de avanzar. Sara era una empleada trabajadora y dedicada. La presentación es el jueves en el Hotel Thyssen en Filadelfia. Tomé unos días libres en el trabajo para ayudarla según fuera necesario. Al final, todo lo que logré fue hacerle algo de comer cuando llegaba a casa. No sabía nada sobre su trabajo, ni tampoco quería saber. Los negocios corporativos de alto nivel me aburrían. Empresarios de Europa, Asia y América del Sur venían aquí, la empresa pagaba sus boletos de avión y proporcionaba habitaciones en el Hotel Thyssen mientras estaban aquí. Era caro como el infierno, y por algunas cosas que Sara había dicho, la empresa estaba sobreestimando sus finanzas. Su presentación era importante para ella, para la empresa y para más de 200 empleados. Hasta el martes por la noche, todo iba bien. Sara llegó a casa con un traje nuevo, un traje gris con una blusa blanca. Desplegó todo lo que necesitaba en la cama de la habitación de invitados. Cuando se trataba de la limpieza de la casa, ella era normal, pero cuando se trataba del trabajo, era meticulosa. No entendía por qué necesitaba sacar su ropa interior de lujo, pero no dije nada. Además de su traje para la presentación, tenía varios vestidos de cóctel lindos para eventos sociales antes y después del evento. Siempre había evitado tales eventos, pero me sentía obligado a ir con ella si ella quería que lo hiciera. Me agradeció la oferta, pero dijo que no era necesario. Todos los materiales y equipos que necesitaba estaban guardados ordenadamente en el maletero de su Volvo. Antes de salir del trabajo, ella misma conducía el coche para asegurarse de que todo estuviera en perfectas condiciones. Tenía todo el día miércoles para prepararse y toda la noche del miércoles para socializar con sus invitados. Sara era tan buena en lo que hacía que sentía que habría sido mejor si simplemente me hubiera mantenido alejado de ella. Finalmente, había terminado. Lo había revisado y vuelto a revisar todo. Todo lo que necesitaba ahora era una ducha caliente y una buena noche de sueño. Supongo que mi error fue que empecé a revisar sus cosas después de que Sara comenzara a ducharse. Pensé que estaba ayudando, pero resultó ser lo contrario. Estaba moviendo cosas en la cama cuando un pequeño sobre blanco cayó del bolsillo lateral de su bolso de maquillaje. Una carta de una farmacia, pero no del tipo que solemos usar. Dentro había 10 pastillas. No tenía idea de qué era, Pren, y las instrucciones eran confusas. Si es necesario, tomar una pastilla y luego una segunda pastilla 12 horas después. Pensé que podría ser algo que ella había conseguido para la ansiedad o los nervios, pero las instrucciones no tenían sentido. La receta estaba escrita a su nombre el lunes. Volví a poner el sobre en su lugar mientras ella terminaba de ducharse. Decidí que quería saber más sobre Pren antes de contarle sobre ello. Por supuesto, si lo mencionaba, significaría que estaba revisando sus cosas. Odio los dilemas. Mientras Sara se preparaba para dormir, fui a nuestro ordenador doméstico y busqué. 10 minutos después, me uní a mi esposa bajo las sábanas. Pasé toda la noche despierto, preguntándome por qué mi esposa había recogido una receta para la píldora del día después, especialmente después de que me hicieran una vasectomía hace 10 años. A la mañana siguiente, me levanté temprano, pero no estaba descansado. Di un largo paseo, esperando que despejara mi mente. Me dirigí hacia casa con reticencia, temiendo lo que podría hacer o decir cuando llegara allí. Mi hijo Joe se unió a la Marina después de la escuela secundaria y estaba en su primer año en San Diego. Nuestra hija Gloria se casó con su amor de la infancia el año pasado y acababa de mudarse a Dallas. Eso dejaba solo a Sara y a mí. Echaba de menos a los niños, pero esperaba envejecer con mi esposa. Ella era la única mujer que me había interesado, y ahora todo estaba. Si Sara estaba teniendo una aventura, lo ocultaba bien. Por supuesto, nunca la vigilé. Nunca miré sus correos electrónicos o llamadas telefónicas. No tenía razones para hacerlo. No tenía forma de saber qué estaba haciendo en el trabajo o después del trabajo. Confiaba en ella completamente. Ion, ¿dónde demonios has estado? ¿Quieres huevos o algo? No, solo café. No me sentía con muchas ganas de hablar. ¿Qué pasa, cariño? Solo son 3 días. Puedes venir si quieres, pero te aburrirás como una ostra. No, realmente no quiero ir, pero odio dejarte sola. Me preocupo cuando no estás aquí. Es muy dulce, querido, pero estará bien. No voy a salir del hotel en todo este tiempo. Pasaré la mayor parte del día asegurándome de que la sala de conferencias esté lista, y esta noche tendré una agradable charla con nuestros posibles clientes. Mañana, probablemente ni siquiera tendré la oportunidad de ir al baño. Llegaré a casa lo más temprano posible el viernes, te prometo un gran fin de semana si sabes a lo que me refiero. Todo eso suena bien, pero no puedes culparme por preocuparme. Soy un mecánico de autos, y tengo una esposa hermosa y exitosa. A veces tengo la sensación de que estás menos interesada en mejorar nuestra situación familiar que en avanzar en tu carrera. Detente, maldita sea, Ion. Siempre he respetado lo que haces para ganarte la vida y nunca he insinuado lo contrario. Criaste a 2 grandes niños y me pusiste a través de la universidad. Eres un gran esposo, un gran padre y un buen proveedor, y nunca olvides eso. Terminé mi café mientras ella recogía la mesa. ¿Quieres que te llame? No, no es una buena idea. Tendré el móvil apagado, y voy a apagar el teléfono de la habitación por la noche para poder dormir. Te llamaré siempre que pueda. La ayudé a cargar el coche, era tan meticulosa con eso como con todo lo demás. Trabajando, le llevaría 3 horas llegar al Hotel Dicen. Me quedé en el porche y la vi marcharse. No me molesté en preguntarle por las pastillas. Pasé el resto de la mañana en el porche. No recuerdo haberme preocupado tanto como ahora. Me sentía pequeño e insignificante. Me sentía fuera de mi liga. Era un tipo de pueblo con un trabajo mediocre y una esposa exitosa. Era una combinación equivocada. Debería haberlo notado antes. Me sentía estúpido. El mejor traje que tenía era una chaqueta azul y un par de pantalones. Al menos tenía algunas corbatas, aunque tenían 10 años de antigüedad. Acababa de terminar de vestirme cuando sonó el teléfono fijo. Oye, cariño, solo quería avisarte de que llegué bien. ¿Tuviste un buen viaje? Supongo que el tráfico no estaba demasiado denso. Estuvo bien. Te llamaré esta noche. Ahora tengo que irme. Estoy en la habitación 714, Sara. Puedo estar en casa de mis padres o en la de mis hermanos esta noche si quieres llamarme a mi móvil. De acuerdo. Suena el teléfono móvil. Te quiero, tengo que irme. Me tomé mi tiempo para llegar a Filadelfia. No fui directo al Lisen, primero me detuve y compré un filete con queso. Prometí hacer una larga noche. No estaba seguro de qué iba a hacer. Estacioné en el garaje del hotel y simplemente esperé. Tarde o temprano, tenía que entrar en el hotel. Simplemente no podía decidir cuándo hacerlo. El sonido de mi teléfono celular me ayudó a tomar mi decisión. Ion, solo quería avisarte de que todo se ha arreglado. Ahora voy a bajar para encontrarme con algunas personas y cenar. No olvidaste nada, ¿verdad? No, todo está bien. Tengo todo en mi habitación para mañana. ¿Necesitas algo? No, Ion, relájate. Voy a apagar mi teléfono. Te llamaré mañana por la mañana. ¿De acuerdo? Ríe, diviértete. No es divertido, Ion, es trabajo. No parecía estar demasiado fuera de lugar. El vestíbulo, el restaurante y las salas de conferencias estaban llenos de gente, así que pude pasar desapercibido. Había un folleto pequeño y bonito que mostraba el diseño de todas las habitaciones del hotel. Me paseé por las diferentes habitaciones y me detuve en las paredes, mirando alrededor entre la multitud. No tenía ni idea de qué haría si Sara me veía. Lo averiguaría si y cuando eso sucediera. Encontré un tablero de eventos que enumeraba todas las habitaciones que estaban siendo utilizadas por los diversos grupos. Bixler Enterprises no tenía habitaciones disponibles para el miércoles por la noche. Esto me pareció interesante. Sara había dicho que no iba a salir del hotel, pero ahora no estaba tan seguro de eso. Había 3 comedores, familiar, informal y de alta cocina. A Sara no le gustaba mucho cenar con niños, así que fui primero al comedor informal. Solo me llevó 5 minutos asegurarme de que no estaba allí. Tuve mejor suerte en el salón gourmet, era una acogedora mesita encajada en la esquina, el tipo de mesa que la gente reserva para tener un encuentro privado. Sara llevaba un vestido de cóctel negro con un escote pronunciado y perlas, se veía elegante y su acompañante parecía apreciarlo. Conocía a algunas personas con las que trabajaba Sara, y él no era una de ellas. Me resultaba familiar, pero no había forma de que pudiera recordarlo. Había muchas sillas libres, así que no tuve problemas para cruzar la sala. Había velas y pequeños candelabros de cristal en las mesas. Apagué la mía y le dije al camarero que me molestaba por el glaucoma. Pedí el plato de pollo de siempre y me acomodé. El camarero me sirvió el café por tercera vez. Disculpe, el tipo en la mesa de enfrente me parece muy familiar. ¿Sabes quién es? Sí, ese es Malcolm Eugene Foote. Es miembro del Consejo Municipal, se espera que se postule para el Congreso en los próximos años. ¿Es esa su esposa con él? Es muy bonita. No, esta es la primera vez que la veo. Siempre usa esa mesa para señoras especiales, si me entiende. Simplemente le sonreí y pedí la cuenta. Nunca había visto a Sara tan sensual con un hombre antes. Parecía captar cada palabra que decía, como si fuera Dios o algo así. No estaban haciendo nada inapropiado, pero tampoco era platónico ni profesional. Cuando me fui, estaban terminando su segunda botella de vino. Ahora entendía por qué se había llevado su lencería elegante. Me acomodé en una esquina del vestíbulo para que no me vieran. 10 minutos después, salieron del restaurante. Ella le tomaba la mano mientras caminaban por el vestíbulo hacia el ascensor. Observé cuidadosamente los indicadores de piso. Que el ascensor se detuviera en el tercer piso era una buena señal, significaba que no lo había llevado a su habitación. Era una mala señal cuando el ascensor no llegaba al séptimo piso, significaba que ella fue a su habitación. Por si acaso me equivocaba en algo, me senté en el vestíbulo y observé el ascensor durante 1 hora. La gente entraba y salía, pero Sara no estaba entre ellos. Saqué mi maleta vacía del coche y me dirigí al mostrador de recepción. Aunque podía demostrar que era su esposo, me costó trabajo conseguir una tarjeta llave. Se dieron después de llamar a la habitación, pero nadie respondió. Finalmente, estaba en camino a la habitación 714 con la tarjeta llave. Ni siquiera encendí las luces al principio, simplemente me senté en la oscuridad de la habitación durante más de 1 hora. No fue difícil asegurarme de que no regresara a la habitación. Primero, empacé todas sus ropas y pertenencias personales. No dejé nada atrás. Revisé el paquete de Preven, todavía quedaban 10 pastillas en el tocador. De manera muy ordenada, estaban todos los artículos que necesitaría para su presentación al día siguiente. Comencé a llenar la maleta. Había 24 carpetas promocionales especialmente encuadernadas y otras 20 carpetas regulares, todas ellas fueron a la maleta. Un proyector digital fue lo siguiente, seguido de una computadora portátil. Tomé su bolso y su celular, que había dejado en la habitación. Todo lo que tenía consigo era un bolso de mano y probablemente un tubo de lápiz labial. Di una vuelta por la habitación tan cuidadosamente como lo hizo ella para asegurarme de no perder nada. Una vez satisfecho, dejé las llaves del coche y mi anillo de bodas en el tocador. Aparte de esos 2 objetos, la habitación estaba completamente vacía. El ascensor se dirigió directamente al estacionamiento, no tuve problemas para llevar 2 maletas, y 20 minutos después, estaba en la autopista rumbo al norte. Pasaban las 3 de la madrugada, no tenía idea de que había pasado tanto tiempo. 1 hora o 2 después, sonó mi teléfono celular, la identificación de llamadas mostraba el número del Listen. Sí, ¿dónde estás? Estaré en casa pronto. Eso fue todo lo que dije. Hubo silencio en el otro extremo de la línea. Los vendedores tienen un viejo dicho, el primero que habla pierde. Pareció una eternidad antes de que ella hablara. Ion, lo siento. No preguntó nada y simplemente colgó. Apagué mi teléfono, era obvio que había regresado a su habitación. Más tarde ese día, tenía que dar una presentación que salvaría a su empresa y le daría un ascenso. Metí las maletas en el desván del garaje. Sara nunca iba allí y nunca pensó en buscar algo allí. Por supuesto, en este punto, estoy bastante seguro de que no importaba. Primero, recogí todas mis ropas y pertenencias personales. La mayoría de los hombres tienen sus propias herramientas, generalmente es un requisito para el trabajo. Pasé por la tienda, cargué las mías en el Subaru y recogí mi último cheque de pago. Para entonces, los bancos ya estaban abiertos, no tuve que hacer ninguna manipulación financiera complicada. Simplemente retiré todo el dinero de mis cuentas. Almorcé en Hagerstown, Maryland. Tenía suficiente dinero para vivir durante unos años, pero sabía que estaría buscando trabajo muy pronto. Sara y yo éramos parecidos en eso de que a ambos nos encantaba trabajar. La voy a extrañar. Pasé un par de horas en las cuevas del Uray y alquilé una habitación cerca de Whitewell. No tenía idea de qué iba a hacer. Era sábado, y me encontré sentado en el acuario de Chattanooga, observando la naturaleza que nunca había visto antes. Pasé unas horas simplemente relajándome y decidí que era un buen lugar para estar. Compré un pase anual para el acuario y, para la hora de la cena, tenía un lugar donde quedarme. Era un remolque móvil en el parque, pero estaba amueblado y era económico. No necesitaba mucho. La primera cosa que haría el lunes por la mañana sería conseguir un trabajo. Un buen hombre de mantenimiento siempre puede conseguir un trabajo, especialmente si está dispuesto a trabajar duro. Podría permanecer discreto hasta que fuera el momento de renovar mi licencia de conducir o las etiquetas del coche, me preocuparé por eso cuando llegue el momento. El domingo por la tarde, llamé a Gloria. Me sentí obligado a informarle sobre lo que estaba sucediendo, pero Sara ya se lo había contado. Fue bastante franca con Gloria sobre lo que había pasado, dijo que había engañado, que la sorprendí, que me fui y que ella perdió su trabajo. Me sentí mal porque ella perdió su trabajo, pero ese era el precio que tenía que pagar. Le pedí a Gloria que le dijera a Josh lo que estaba sucediendo la próxima vez que hablara con él. También le dije que la llamaría aproximadamente una vez al mes para verificar cómo iban las cosas. No le dije dónde estaba. Para el mediodía del día siguiente, tenía un trabajo. En realidad, estaba a poca distancia del parque de remolques, con el Waffle House a mitad de camino. ¿Qué más podría querer un hombre? No sé cómo manejaron el papeleo, pero me estaban pagando $20 por hora sin hacer preguntas. Estaba feliz, y ellos también. Ni siquiera tendría que tocar el dinero que traje conmigo. Unos 2 meses después, Gloria me informó que Sara se había mudado de la casa y estaba viviendo con sus padres. Gloria no sabía nada más, pero estaba feliz de que estuviera estable y le estuviera yendo bien. Josh me llamó desde San Diego solo para informarme que iba a hacer un crucero. Era técnico en aviónica en un portaaviones, intentó explicar qué hacía exactamente, pero estaba más allá de mi comprensión. Nunca supe mucho sobre cosas técnicas. Ambos tuvieron cuidado de no decir nada malo sobre su madre, aprecié eso. Después de eso, todo siguió como siempre. Comencé a hablar con Gloria al menos semanalmente, Josh y yo comenzamos a enviar correos electrónicos regularmente. Gloria hablaba regularmente con Sara, pero decía muy poco sobre lo que estaba haciendo o dónde estaba. Nunca presenté la solicitud de divorcio, y parece que Sara tampoco lo hizo. Tengo una licencia de conducir de Tennessee y las etiquetas en el Subaru. Comencé a frecuentar un bar local un par de veces al mes y tuve encuentros casuales, 2 mujeres se alternaban como mis compañeras nocturnas regulares. No buscaban compromisos, y yo tampoco, parecía funcionar bien para todos nosotros. La vida era buena. Eso fue hace mucho tiempo, y gradualmente olvidé a Sara. Con el tiempo, el Subaru comenzó a darme problemas, había olvidado cuánto tiempo había pasado. Tenía más de 200,000 millas. Estaba reflexionando sobre esto con una jarra de cerveza un día cuando me di cuenta de que habían pasado casi 5 años desde que me fui de casa. Mantuve un contacto cercano con ambos hijos, Gloria ya tenía 2 hijos propios en este momento y quería que los visitara. Josh casi se casó con una mujer tailandesa, pero en el último momento, se negó. Por lo general, trabajaba 6 días a la semana y usaba el domingo para recuperarme del sábado por la noche, no había ninguna buena razón para que alguien llamara a la puerta de mi remolque a las 6 de la mañana de un viernes. Su grosería fue recompensada por un hombre medio desnudo abriendo la puerta, los calzoncillos del día son repugnantes, y la dama en la puerta, juzgando por la expresión en su rostro, estuvo de acuerdo conmigo. Ella apartó la mirada, pero su compañero no parecía impresionado. Norm habría usado pantalones, pero en un momento como este, los invitados me molestaron. Estamos buscando a John Terrell. No los conozco. Me llamo David Simmons, y esta es mi esposa Mara. Tenemos un problema y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Lo siento mucho, no trabajo a altas horas de la noche. Si necesitan algo relacionado con su auto, tendrán que ir a la tienda. Esto provocó varias miradas en blanco y finalmente una respuesta. No tiene nada que ver con tu trabajo, es más un problema personal. ¿Podemos entrar? El interior del remolque lucía desordenado, rara vez tenía invitados, así que rara vez lo limpiaba. Incluso mis novias insistían en que fuéramos a su lugar. Hagan como en su casa, déjenme ponerme los pantalones enseguida. Al entrar en el dormitorio, dejé la puerta abierta solo para mostrarles lo hospitalario que soy. También me puse una camisa. ¿Les gustaría tomar café? Solo tomará unos 10 minutos. Aparté algunas cosas del sofá para que pudieran sentarse, no hubo respuesta a la pregunta del café. Tenemos una hija adoptiva de 4 años y otra de 2 que necesita un trasplante de médula ósea, y esperamos que nos puedas ayudar. Estamos dispuestos a pagarte si es necesario. ¿Con mi médula ósea? No, queremos usarla y estamos dispuestos a compensarte por cualquier inconveniente. Creo que quieren comprarla. Estaba actuando como un listillo, y de repente me di cuenta de ello. Estas personas eran serias, tenían un problema real y estaban buscando ayuda. Lo siento mucho, no quise interrumpir. Por favor, continúen. Nuestra mejor oportunidad de encontrar un donante es un familiar cercano. Eres nuestra mejor esperanza. Mira esto. No quiero ser un grosero, pero creo que se equivocaron de persona. ¿Cuándo nació su hija? Cumplirá 5 años en julio. Marche Simons habló por primera vez, y sonó sincera. Odio ser el portador de malas noticias, pero me hice una vasectomía hace 15 años. No hay forma de que pueda ser su padre. ¿Por qué tu nombre estaba en el certificado de nacimiento? No puedo responder eso, tal vez deberían preguntarle a su madre. Esa afirmación fue recibida con silencio. Sentí pena por estas personas, pero no sabía cómo ayudarles. ¿Cuál es el nombre de la madre? Sarah Lise Terrell. No encontraba las palabras. Tal vez no debería haber tomado esas malditas pastillas de ella, por supuesto, entonces esas personas no tendrían una hija en absoluto. Todo lo que pensaba que había superado el dolor, y aquí está de nuevo, viejos recuerdos de mi esposa teniendo relaciones sexuales con ese maldito político de Filadelfia. Estaba empezando a olvidarlo todo, y ahora estaba de vuelta. Maldita sea. Ahora entiendo y pido disculpas por mi grosería e insensibilidad. Haré todo lo que esté en mi poder para ayudarles. En primer lugar, porque no puede Sara hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Médicamente, no puede. ¿Por qué no? Es madre, tiene que ser una donante adecuada. Oh, ella es una donante adecuada, pero está demasiado enferma. Los médicos se negaron siquiera a considerar utilizarla. ¿Enferma de qué? Está muriendo de insuficiencia hepática. Le quedan menos de 6 meses de vida. Esto no tiene sentido. Siempre ha estado perfectamente sana. Además, no creo que un hígado enfermo le impida donar médula ósea. El hospital no aceptará su firma en el formulario de consentimiento. ¿Estás diciendo que hay algo mal en su cabeza? Ambos me miraron en silencio, sabían la respuesta, pero no querían decirlo. En ese momento, no quería que se sintieran aún más incómodos. Hace 10 minutos, no me importaban, pero ahora sentía que tenía que protegerlos y ayudarlos. ¿Cómo sucedió esto? ¿Podría alguno de mis hijos ayudar? Quizás, pero pensamos que eras nuestra mejor esperanza. ¿Por qué no van tras su padre, su verdadero padre? Pensamos que eras tú. No tenemos ni idea de quién más podría ser. Sara no nos dijo nada sobre otro posible padre. De hecho, ella no estaba en condiciones de explicar nada, agregó Mara. Obtuvimos la mayoría de nuestra información de la agencia de adopción. Tuve que preparar café y hacer pis, permítanme un momento. Dejé a mis invitados sentados mientras preparaba el café. Solo tomó unos minutos. Mientras se preparaba, fui al baño, algo que necesitaba hacer urgentemente. Traté de ser discreto, ya había avergonzado lo suficiente a Mara. ¿Dónde viven? En Westchester, Pensilvania. Les haré una oferta. Si les digo quién es el verdadero padre de su hija, deben prometerme que lo perseguirán sin descanso hasta obtener lo que desean. ¿De qué estás hablando? El padre de su hija es un político prominente en Pensilvania. Por supuesto, negará todo y probablemente les proporcionará documentos legales para detener sus esfuerzos. Si acuerdan presionar lo suficiente para que él admita que la niña es suya, podrán avergonzarlo y obligarlo a hacerse un trasplante de médula ósea. Eso es lo que quieren, ¿verdad? Sí, claro, pero ¿cómo hacemos eso? No lo sé. Soy mecánico. Trabajo con metal para ganarme la vida. Creo que la mejor manera sería utilizar la televisión, la radio y los periódicos. Los políticos harán cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. ¿Tienen amigos que puedan ayudar? Bueno, ahora ambos estaban sonriendo. Debo haber dicho algo que les dio esperanza. Creo que podemos hacer esto. ¿Quién demonios es él? Malcolm Eugene Foote. Se postula para el Senado de los Estados Unidos. Apuesto a que hará cualquier cosa para evitar una mala publicidad. El café estaba listo, pero David y Marchen no podían esperar para llegar a casa. Antes de irse, les dije cómo ponerse en contacto con Gloria y Josh en caso de que los necesitaran. Estaba seguro de que ayudarían. También les pedí que me dijeran dónde estaba Sarah. Probablemente estaría en Pensacola antes de que ellos regresaran a Westchester. Me corté el pelo y compré una camisa nueva. Sarah era una tramposa que arruinó mi vida, pero aún así quería lucir bien cuando la viera. Era otro remolque, pero esta vez era un bonito doble nuevo. Allí estaba su Volvo con una llanta desinflada y un parabrisas roto. La mujer que abrió la puerta no era Sarah, parecía que la habían empapado fuerte y la habían dejado empapada. Tenía al menos 45, tal vez 50, y debió haber tenido una vida difícil. La falta de maquillaje no ayudaba, y simplemente se veía horrible. No tuve la oportunidad de abrir la boca. Caray, si no es John Terrell. Nunca esperé verte aquí. Tuve que usar la vieja línea, me estás poniendo en desventaja. Serry Hart. Pasa, entra. ¿Quieres una cerveza? No, pero gracias. Estoy aquí para ver a Sarah. Serry cruzó la habitación y se detuvo en el buffet del comedor. Aquí está, John. Mírala todo lo que quieras. Su mano señalaba una urna de latón que estaba en el centro del buffet vacío. Supongo que llegué demasiado tarde. No me moví, solo me quedé mirando el contenedor frente a mí. ¿Puedo tomar una cerveza ahora? Sarah se mudó a Pensacola después de dar a su bebé en adopción. Compró el remolque con el dinero que recibió de Bixler Enterprises después de que la despidieron. Tenía una participación en las ganancias, 401k, y vacaciones y días de enfermedad. Eventualmente, consiguió un trabajo en una fábrica local de prendas de vestir donde trabajaba en el departamento de envíos. Allí fue donde conoció a Serry. Serry alquilaba una habitación de Sarah. Cada centavo que Sarah ganaba iba para el alcohol. Empezó con vino y gradualmente pasó a bebidas más fuertes, las más baratas. Eventualmente, perdió su trabajo debido a su alcoholismo y se vio obligada a usar sus ahorros. Nunca salió con nadie ni salió a ningún lado. Serry se quedó con ella, pagó sus servicios públicos y compró alimentos que Sarah no comía. Le llevó más de 3 años quitarse la vida. Increíblemente, ella tenía un testamento y me dejó un doble remolque y un Volvo. Serry explicó que Sarah estaba tan angustiada por lo que había hecho que simplemente se rindió. No intentó evitar el embarazo ni siquiera terminarlo. La adopción se había arreglado meses antes de que naciera el bebé. Nunca volvió a trabajar, excepto en los trabajos clandestinos que hacía mal. Serry dijo que Sarah no parecía tener ambición ni propósito en la vida. Sarah hablaba mucho de mí pero tenía miedo de intentar contactarme. Gloria le dio mi número, pero nunca me llamó. Era como si su aventura de una noche la hubiera lastimado más a ella que a mí. Estuve allí durante 2 semanas y luego vendí el remolque de Cerry por $1 y obtuve $3,000 por el Volvo. 2 días después, estaba en Westchester visitando a mis nuevos amigos David y Marche. Malcolm Eugene Foote resistió al principio, pero David y Marche lo presionaron hasta que cedió. Insistió en pruebas de ADN, que demostraron que era el padre. Para salvar la cara, más o menos lo obligaron a someterse a un trasplante de médula ósea, que fue exitoso. La carrera política y la vida familiar de Malcolm no dejaron una impresión favorable. Su caída en las encuestas fue tan rápida que el partido lo reemplazó por otro candidato unos meses antes de las elecciones. Su esposa solicitó el divorcio y fue muy pública al respecto. Sara y yo estamos viajando ahora a Dallas para ver a Gloria y a mis nietos. No sé cuánto tiempo mantendré a Sara conmigo, probablemente hasta que tenga a alguien.